The idea of cities of learning, I mean, it's been around for a very long time, and UNESCO have their Learning Cities programme, which is kind of well known. And we were really interested in the work of LRNG in the US at the time. And they developed a digital badging kind of technology platform, which was helping youth discover new interests and build new pathways into learning and work. So I think they've got about 10 cities sort of interested and on board. And Pittsburgh and the Remote Learning Network were one of those kind of initial organisations that were involved. So we spent some time, or my colleague did, spend some time over there, looking in depth at how they were, using particularly digital badging in this case to recognise learning in broader contexts. And we developed, and we kind of had a little, what would make this kind of initiative successful, if we were to apply some of this sort of thinking in the UK. So we developed a model, or a kind of conceptual model, around 3 design principles, which are the 3 sort of circles you see at the top: leadership, networks, and platform. And all 3 elements are really critical for something like this to work well. Often you can focus on the technology side specifically in kind of recognising and connecting learning in new ways. But all 3, and particularly the leadership aspect, is really important. So from a leadership perspective, it's very much about kind of building a kind of a strong kind of core group of organisations at the level of place, whether it's a city or a region, that's cross-sector. So kind of education institutions, business, local administrations, civil society, that come together. They develop a common sort of vision and mission for their city or their place over, say, a 10-year period, and commit to working together to make it happen, often in a way that kind of disrupts kind of existing institutional priorities, and often kind of political policy cycles, which lead to sort of short-termism in thinking. So that was a really important aspect for us. How do you develop a strong local leadership model that would withstand funding changes and political changes and so on? So we started developing out that concept and working with UK cities that we thought had strong energy and capacity to develop this type of leadership. The second design principle was around networks. So how do you kind of really mobilise networks of providers of formal and informal learning? So again, schools, colleges, universities, businesses, communities, you can get them all kind of mobilised and excited behind an idea for a city of learning, where they're all involved and they all see themselves as having a place within it. And kind of network mobilisation and stewardship is a really important aspect of developing a learning city. Often the leadership part is critical into kind of setting a kind of common agenda and storytelling and making people feel included. But thinking in networks, I would say, it's been a really important aspect of this, and something I would relate back to my time in the US. How do you kind of think and conceive of your place in a networked way? And then we decided to develop a digital platform as well. That's really important, but where the platform becomes a sort of connective tissue around the initiative. It's not all about it being a technology solution. So we work with these networks of providers to start basically credentialising the different learning opportunities that they were offering. And this has proved particularly valuable in recognising informal learning. We know learning takes place absolutely everywhere in a locality, but how do we start giving recognition and value to learning that is undervalued within the traditional education system? So we, like I said, started working with organisations to develop their badges around their provision. And then critically, we developed this idea of pathways. So both interest and destination driven pathways, where you would connect up sort of learning that might go on in the home or online with learning that would take place in the community, with learning that would take place in schools, to create and design new pathways which were sort of invisible or inaccessible to learners, and particularly which disrupted that very linear system of progression. I don't know if the same is true in New Zealand, but certainly here, we have very kind of rigid pathways for progression, and it's how we have a one chance system where you sit formal qualifications. If you don't succeed, you don't then progress. And we have a lot of what we call dead ends, learning dead ends. And the idea is we need to disrupt and get rid of any dead ends that exist. There should be multiple entry points. We should be able to be learning throughout our lives. and there should be low barriers to entry. So how do you envisage your learning journey over a period of time and where you live in a different way? That sort of disruption of the linear system was really important. And we developed a sort of what we call the learning spine around this idea of helping people and places tell the story of their learning. And this was really a way of categorizing the digital badges, which were recognizing the different forms of learning around kind of engaging in learning, participating, demonstrating and leading. And you might see that sort of competency progression throughout those 4 layers. And we, from a kind of pedagogical perspective, we use the OECD Education 2030 framework to think about the knowledge, skills and attitudes and values which are embedded in these different learning experiences. But I think that idea of different types of pathways, and often interest-driven pathways, might lead toward a specific destination for a learner. But if you don't know what's available, you don't know how to get there, you need to start somewhere. On the flip side, as a young person, you might know that you want to pursue a particular career, or you really want to get into this particular volunteering opportunity, but you might have no idea of the steps that you need to take to get there. So the badge pathways provided that sort of visibility and accessibility for that. And we launched 2 pilots in 2 UK cities last autumn, and there were a number of other cities sort of onboarding at the time. I think the pilots have had to be reconfigured somewhat in the context of the pandemic, because place-based learning as well, all learning has pretty much ended up going online or taking place in the home. So I think they've had to work around that. Anyway, but hopefully there'll be useful kind of learnings from that evaluation, which I think is due early next year.